Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. It's race week. We're off to Monza. That means it's predictions time. But before we get into our predictions, I want to quickly touch on some comments that were made from the CEO of Formula One, Stefano Domenicali, about his sort of wish list for the future of Formula One, because it is ridiculous. Now, these are all in a bid to boost the promoter appeal and the sort of reach the younger audience and get more of a younger audience interested in the sport. Now, these, I believe, are all in a bid to have more competitiveness out on track, and I think his way of doing that is to increase the number of competitive sessions that we're having. So scrapping free practice is the first one, which I think is an absolutely ridiculous notion to even consider. The fact of the matter is that within this sport, the teams get very little time in their current machinery out on track to test and get ready. You know, next year being an exception because we've got 12 days, but typically speaking, they get 3 days of pre-season testing. That's the first time they get those cars out on track. This is not the days of unlimited testing anymore. So unless they're going to bring that back, they cannot do this. Scrapping the free practice sessions at every single race is only going to harm the sport, because the teams and the drivers, these sessions are vital for them. We can't scrap these sessions without having something to replace it that the teams can use to test the cars, the tyres, the drivers can get used to the tracks. There needs to be something. The whole thing for Domenicali is the fact that people aren't watching the free practice sessions. Not every fan of a sport is going to watch every single session. This is also a global sport, let's remember that. So a lot of people are watching from different time zones that the races are actually happening in. And there will be people that are not willing to get up at 4, 5, 6 in the morning to watch a free practice session, which is understandable. I do get up at that time, but that's beside the point. When we're in the European part of the calendar, the Friday free practice sessions happen whilst I'm at work. I can't watch them. So I have to watch them when I get home. I think it's short-sighted to get rid of the free practice sessions because people might not watch them. I think that's a bigger detriment to the sport than having them on currently. He wants reverse grid races. I just think it's a gimmick. I think it's gimmicky. I know we do it in F2. I know we do it in F1 Academy. I think if we're going to do it in sprint races, but I don't think it's really needed in Formula One. He also wants to add in more sprint races, and again, nobody's asking for this. There is a bigger issue with the sprint races that needs to be addressed before we start increasing the amount of them on the calendar. They're at the wrong tracks. We don't need a sprint race around Silverstone. We don't need sprint races around Spa. We also need to look at the format of the sprint races because, let's be honest, nothing happens in them. Nothing happens in a sprint race because right after the sprint is qualifying. The teams all drive way more conservatively than what they are going to do in the main race on a Sunday because they don't want to damage the car before the qualifying session. So no, I don't think we need more sprint races. How can you put more sprint races on but get rid of free practice? It doesn't make any sense to me. I think these are the most ridiculous ideas I've ever seen. The last one is that he wants shorter races to shorten the length of a Grand Prix. Are you nuts, mate? His big reasoning behind wanting to shorten the races is that he believes they're too long for young people, and his reasoning for saying that is because from his research and data, the younger audience is more likely to go and watch the highlights than apparently watch the main race or something to that effect. I don't think that more people watching the highlights is a sign that we need to reduce the race length. One, the races are an hour and a half to 2 hours long. If you can't sit and watch that, then that is more of a problem of the viewer than the sport. Two, the sport is hidden behind a paywall. If you want to watch Formula One, you either have to be signed up to F1 TV, you need to have a subscription with ESPN or Sky, or I think it's DAZN in Spain. Obviously, there's multiple broadcasters around the world that show the sport depending on the country. These are incredibly expensive. A Sky Sports membership, for example, is £30 a month, and I know that the rest of them are probably not much cheaper. That's a lot of money for a young person to be able to afford. So it's not surprising that they might not watch the race because they can't afford to. So the easiest option for them is to go and watch the highlights. It's not an issue with the length of the race. The issue is the fact that it is so expensive to be able to go and watch this sport. Not even trackside. In your own home, you're paying an extortionate amount of money to be able to watch the race from your sofa. I did have a third point as well, and I can't remember what it was. Oh yeah, sorry. Just because you shorten the races doesn't mean that you're going to increase the viewers. The biggest issue with this sport is that we don't currently right now have closer racing. The cars are too big, it's a dirt air formula, we don't know what's going to happen next year. But shortening the races isn't going to make better racing. We've already got a short race, we've got a sprint, and what do we get from it? Nothing. He also said he'd had the support of the teams and the drivers or something along those lines, but I can't imagine the teams are going to be keen on ditching free practices. I can't imagine the teams are going to be keen on having more sprint races because all it does is just add to an already grueling schedule. And I can't imagine the drivers are going to be on board with half of these changes. So it just seems utter ridiculous to me. But anyway, moving on to our predictions and kicking things off with pole position, Oscar Piastri. I think it could be a pretty slam dunk pole position for Oscar this weekend. We know that it will probably be tight between him and Lando. We know how he likes to start a weekend. He starts off slightly slower and really begins to ramp up. He takes his time to get embedded into the track, get the laps in, get himself used to the feeling of the car and the tyres and the track layout and everything like that, and the performance and the grip of the track. And then when it counts, he pulls out incredible lap times. He did it last weekend in Zandvoort, pulled out a 12 millisecond gap on Lando. And even if Lando hadn't retired with an oil leak, Piastri would have still won that race. He has been pretty dominant this year. I think Monza will suit his driving. I think Monza will suit the car. The Monza spec car, I can't imagine, will deviate too much from the current form. And they have done very well around tracks like Saudi and everything, so I can see them having a pretty good time at Monza. Now for P3 in the race, Charles Leclerc. Listen, I had to give myself one delusional prediction, but even my levels of delusion do not reach as far for me to believe that they could go and do what they did last year and win this race. I think if Charles is going to be on the podium, it's P3. He's not going to get any higher than that. I think it should be a pretty alright weekend for Ferrari. You know, the spirit of Monza, the spirit of the Tifosi really just pushing them up the grid. Well, Charles up the grid. Lewis has a 5-place grid penalty, so God knows where he's going to start and how he's going to fade out there. But my one delusional prediction, Charles Leclerc is P3. Just let me have it. It doesn't need to come true. I just need to hope. Next up in P2, Lando Norris. Listen, Lando at this point really doesn't have anything to lose. There's a 34-point gap in the championship. He's pretty clear of anyone trying to attack him for P2. And as I said, he really doesn't have anything to lose, and that might actually help Lando thrive. There is a camp that believes that Oscar Piastri now, with a few fingers, I would say 3 fingers, 4 fingers, on the championship trophy, it's in his sights, it's within his reach, might start driving a little bit more conservatively. I don't think that will be the case. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Oscar will drive more conservatively and that will give Lando a bit more of an edge. But I don't see it playing out that way. I think it's Lando P2, but I think it'll be a close fight between the two boys. And in P1, obviously I've got Oscar Piastri. As I said, I don't think he will drive more conservatively. I don't think he'll lose his cool or his composure. I think that is, as I said, a bit of his super weapon. And I don't think he'll let it get to him. I think he'll drive and go into this weekend as he does any weekend because he knows he can't afford to lose his composure and change what he's doing because it could lose him a championship. So I think it should be a pretty safe P1 in pole for Oscar, but it could be either McLaren, let's be honest. Lando could come absolutely flying out the gate and go and take pole and just go and win the race by a mile, but I do think it'll be close, but I think Oscar will have the edge. And finally, a couple of other predictions. I think this should be a pretty decent weekend for Franco Colapinto, in that he scores his first points of the season. Listen, Colapinto showed signs of improvement at the Dutch GP. He was close to the top 10 by less than a second, and I would say he needs to have a good result this weekend. I would say his future is on the line, and he desperately needs a decent result. Returning to the track that he debuted last year with Williams could be exactly what he needs to kickstart his season, using his prior experience to his advantage to help him go and score some points. He's running out of time to convince Flavio Briatore that he is worthy of continuing on in that seat, and he needs to start scoring points. And Monza could be perfect for him to prove that he has what it takes, but he needs to start scoring points, and I'm thinking potentially this weekend. And finally, A Williams in the top 5. I think that Williams should actually run pretty decent. I think they'll finish both within the top 10. I think Albon is primed for another top 5 finish. I think Williams has always ran fairly well around Monza, and I think their car will suit the characteristics of this track. I think it's a points finish for both drivers, but I think that Albon could be in with a chance of getting a top 5 finish. His qualifying has been pretty on point recently. He's been doing pretty decent in the races. And as I said, I do think the characteristics of the car will suit the characteristics of the track. So I think it should be a win-win for Williams. But yeah, I think it's a points finish for both the drivers, but I think it's a top 5 for Alex Albon. And that is everything from us. We'll be back very soon. Let me know your predictions in the comments down below. Love you, bye!